Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum in Simi Valley, California, where we're covering the Reagan National Defense Forum. Our coverage here is sponsored by Leonardo DRS, and we're talking to the President and CEO of Huntington Ingalls Industries, Mike Petters, who has one of the nation's leading shipyards are under your charge. Mike, thanks very much for the time.
Vago, thanks for having us, and it's good to see you again.
It's always great to see you. We were on one of your august products. We were in San Diego. We spent a fantastic day aboard Midway that you guys built during World War II and commissioned her in 1945 and served the nation all the way until 1992. And Enterprise, which you're in the process of processing, preparing her for eventual scrapping. I want to start first.
We're also building the Enterprise.
You are also building the new Enterprise, but you're also building the new Big John. Right. So I mean, you guys got a lot of stuff. You just delivered Ford, so there's a lot of activity, and I want to get to that in a second. Exactly. But I want to start with the tax proposal that's moving through the Senate. There's a lot of discussion about why it would be very good for corporate America. A lot of the associations have come out for it. Talk to us as a CEO, how important is this tax measure to companies like yours?
Well, in our particular case, it's probably less of an impact than it would be for some other folks. But across the industry, it's a big deal because, from my standpoint, it's the ability to create capital to invest and the ability to bring capital back on shore. I think those are two big things that will make a big impact. Again, those things don't really affect me so much, but they do affect the industry in a big way.
Everybody has been talking about what's been learned here at this year's Reagan Forum. Right. And in the first panel discussion, everybody's pointing to the stuff that the ranking member, Adam Smith, Democrat from Washington on the House Armed Services Committee, said about there not being that much more money. You and I spoke at the Reagan Forum last year when President Trump had just been elected, and there was a lot of very, very high hopes about very large numbers of ship orders and everything else come in, sort of another Reagan defense investment stream. Have we seen that yet? How has this affected your business? And more broadly, do you share the same concern that some of the other industry folks here share, which is this could be a very short-term bump we're seeing before we have to grapple with the national debt that continues to rise?
Yeah, I think that's all legitimate. We certainly as a nation have made some commitments in pension and welfare that are going to, in the next 10 or 15 years, we're not going to be able to pay for. And so we've got to find a solution to that. That's a national security issue that we have to go solve. It will directly affect the ability to sustain the investment that we need to make in our security posture. So when you start thinking about elements of the budget, I certainly believe that the Navy needs to be bigger. Or I see the Navy every day, and our view is it needs to be bigger. It appears that that's the Navy's view also, and there's a lot of support for that. And the question is, that takes time. Can you do that? Can you build that bigger Navy sustainably without solving that problem? I don't think you can. I think ultimately you're going to have to come to grips with our ability to meet our commitments on pension and welfare.
Do you think that's, how big of an impact do you think it'll be on your business? And as you guys war game this out, as a company that does have a very good strategic sell, do you think it's 1-2 years from now that perhaps the rising tide turns?
Well, shipbuilding is such a long-term business that, our business is longer term than the business cycle is. And so in up cycles and down cycles, we've been pretty flat straight through. It's almost as if the country is paying an insurance premium for the Navy throughout thick and thin. And that's kind of the way that it's been, and that's the way I expect it will continue. We may have in the next couple of years, we may have maybe a dislocation where we're actually going to decide to pay more to build a bigger Navy. And I think in the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see a lot of activity to get things under contract. And we, just about every single program that we have will come due for another contract in the next 30 months. That's pretty exciting, actually, because you can lock in a significant amount of work. We're not talking about 1 or 2 ships here. You're talking about all of Block 5 for Virginia class. The next, my preference for the next 2 carriers to get those under contract. Columbia class is going to start up. The frigate program is going to kick off. We're going to make the transition from LPDs to LXRs, and that's a lengthy run program. So, there's all of those decisions are going to be made in the next 2.5, 3 years. And then the question is, okay, how, I would say I don't expect that this this 15-year problem of we don't know how to pay for pension and welfare is going to be solved in the next 2 or 3 years. But what are the things we ought to be doing now to solve that problem so it doesn't become a crisis for us in 15 years? I think we can start talking about that.
Deputy Secretary Shanahan, Secretary Mattis, Navy Secretary Spencer have talked about faster, delivering things faster, speeding the process up, speeding acquisition. As we heard Secretary Spencer say, hey, look, my job in the Navy is really not all that much different from a CEO. Make sure that you're matching resources to be able to deliver outputs. What are some of the things that industry can do as the Pentagon and the Navy Department work to accelerate and speed up? What are things you can do to speed up, to actually meaningfully take cost out of platforms?
Yeah, so there's a range of things there. First of all, the Navy has made a couple of big decisions to indicate how important this is to them. The decision to make the LXR look like the LPD, that's really a decision not to take the time to redesign a ship. That's saying the ship we have, the design we have, is the hull design that we have is good enough. Let's just go with that and see how we can get as much capability into that platform as efficiently as we can. That's a big signal. That's a signal that we need these assets in the fleet. The frigate discussion about we want to have a parent design and a talk about foreign designs or wherever, but a parent design to drive the frigate. Again, it's let's not take the time to do a clean sheet design and make this thing everything it could possibly be. We can live with what we get. We need the asset more importantly than we need to have everything we can possibly get on it. So those are two really big signals to the industry. So where we are is we're stepping back and saying, given all of that, how do we improve our efficiency so that we can be cheaper, so that we can be more affordable, but so that we can also be faster. And we are in that fourth industrial revolution right now with technology, where just about any technology you look at is aimed at driving efficiency, reducing time, reducing cost, taking it out of your business. And we're taking that basically a full court press on that right now across all of our product lines.
Do you think that this is a period for some radical design experimentation? I know that Littoral Combat Ship was done in order to be that big break, but it ended up being, depending on how you talk to it, expensive for what it is. In World War II and in other times in history, we've tried experimentation, although the Navy has been historically a lot more conservative about what it's done in terms of ship design. But do you think that this could be, given changes, for example, in naval weaponry and how deadly it is, you trade off, for example, the amount of compartmentalization we had in Midway was driven at a time when we knew what the torpedo dangers and everything else were. Now we're looking at weapons that are so powerful. Do you worry less about, for example, survivability, can make certain trade-offs to be able to deliver sort of more usable capability over the life of the ship, but in a much cheaper way, understanding that you're taking a little bit greater battle risk, for example?
Yeah, I think the thing to remember about innovation, at least my perspective on innovation, is that it's required, but it's not something you do at scale. And so, I think it's good to go and play around with some experimental designs. The trick is going to be, can you go and work on a lot of different ideas without disrupting your production lines, right? You've got hot production lines right now. You've got pretty clear indication that the Navy needs to be about 20% bigger. And so there's talk of bringing ships back. There's talk of accelerate. You need to make sure that your execution model of your business, execution model of your investment account is focused on, let's get that done. You can go and do some experimenting on the side. You can't replace the execution model with the experiments. You need to do the experiments, and eventually the experiments prove themselves to the point where they can scale into and then replace part of your execution model. But we're not anywhere near that right now. And so that's why my view is you got to build what you got. If you want to go experiment, fine, go experiment, but let's build what we got and change the size, make the impact we have to make.
Do you think that the frigate version of the National Security Cutter is the right answer for the U.S. Navy?
Well, we certainly think that there's a lot that can be done with that ship, for sure. I mean, it'll be up to them as they go through how are they going to evaluate it. But we get a lot of really positive feedback from the Coast Guard on what they are able to use that platform for. And based on what we know so far of what the frigate requirements might be, we think there might be a good match there. It certainly is in the sweet part of our business that says you take what you have and you just make it more capable. We've been doing that on platforms for a long time.
Let me ask you about submarines, which is a little bit more challenging. You guys, you and your General Dynamics teammates sort of set the model. It was seen as a model acquisition program, the Virginia-class attack submarine. You guys were delivering early and under cost for a long time, but those schedules have started to slip, have slipped. What's the challenge there? Do you guys have a recovery plan that's going to get you back on track? Because folks have told me from the companies, look, the challenge now is, how we make money, because all of this was predicated on delivering on time and delivering early.
Well, I guess and there's probably a lot in that. My view of this is one of those collateral effects of sequestration. When we went through the challenge around the aircraft carrier refueling, and they were talking about possibly canceling the George Washington refueling, and then they delayed it a year. That caused my team at Newport News to have to go through the tough process of layoffs. And when we laid people off, unfortunately, we end up laying off younger folks, and it disproportionately hits certain programs. So when you start to bring people back and fill that in, the efficiency is not what it was before. And so there's a piece of that anytime you're building up the workforce again and you're ramping up the workforce, you've got to be able to make sure you go manage. And we've done this a few times. We're looking our way, and how are we going to do this as we ramp into Columbia? Make sure that we get Columbia off to a good start, and make sure that we keep the submarine program as the gold standard. But I would just say that anytime you get a program into serial production, it's going to turn into a good program. The destroyer program has turned into a really good program again. The National Security Cutter program for the Coast Guard has turned into a really good program. And the things that make the submarine program work are the same things that are making those programs successful. They're predictable. They're repetitive. The cycle of acquisition matches the cycle of construction.
From a manpower, and last question because I know you've got to go, but from a manpower perspective, you guys do have one of the most selective. Your trade school that you guys run down in Newport News is actually more selective than Harvard in terms of the number of candidates that come in through the door, and it is a rather incredible program. But are you getting the flow of the manpower you need, of the quality, as the entire naval nuclear enterprise in particular tries to build up those skill sets that you need, especially when you're going to get into this other robust carrier building cycle and you're employing a whole bunch of rather new and novel technologies to take life cycle costs out of the ship?
Right. So first of all, we are getting the people that we need. The interesting thing for us is if you start thinking about product innovation, you can also think about process innovation. The way that you train people is fundamentally, radically changing today. And we're going to be using, across all of our business, starting in Newport News, we're going to be using visual work instructions, which are fundamentally different than what we've ever trained people to do in the past. We used to have to train people to read paper drawings. Now we're going to give them a tablet, and it's going to show them exactly what they need to go do and know. That means the time to train is going to be less. That means the ability to get somebody to a place where they're productive is going to be more efficient. And so working through those kinds of innovations in your business are going to actually really drive a whole lot of efficiency into the overall product.
Would 5-year budgeting help you?
I mean, that's what we do. We put together in our business, we do a 10-year plan. We certainly neck it down to say, here's where we are in 5 years, and then this is where we're going to be in 1 year. I think the fundamental problem is that, in the government sector, they run on a 12-month cycle, and it's all about budget and expense. Every company that's here plans longer term and is thinking about investment and return. And so those are two very different ways to look at the same problem.
You're a Naval Academy graduate and former submarine officer. How do you think Navy's going to do this year?
I think Navy's going to do great, beat Army.
Sir, thanks very much. It's always a pleasure.
Good to see you. Thanks, Vago. Good to see you again.